Welcome back. For those of you who had a day off yesterday, I hope you enjoyed it. For those of you who went to work yesterday, I hope you found some of the spirit of what you've been doing over the last couple of days, that little droplet in your work somewhere. Yeah. Now, just to let you know, today it's going to be a fairly kind of an intensive day in terms of awareness through movement. We'll do probably 4 awareness through movement lessons today. So please pace yourself. Yep. And that's what you're trying to do all the time, really, isn't it? Just pace yourself. It's part of being a good learner, if you want to talk about it that way. Hi, Ruth. We have a practitioner with us today. Ruth? I know, but I was a really naughty boy and I actually forgot to say, so my apologies.
Actually, no, that's a very good idea. We have that practice before we haven't really been introduced.
Yeah.
So I think it probably is a good idea.
I agree, and I was a bit remiss, so my apologies, Ruth. Where was I? Oh, yes. Where was I? I was saying to myself. If you like the idea of practicing to be a good learner, that's one thing, and it's certainly worthwhile. But if that idea doesn't sit with you, practice being kind to yourself. That works. Yeah? Be kind. For those of you who have read some of Feldenkrais's books, dipped in and now and then, in one of the prefaces to his books, I think it's Potent Self, he talks about this idea of loving your neighbour as thyself. Have any of you read that little preface? It's quite an eye-opener. He talks about that, that saying that permeates the Judeo-Christian world of loving thy neighbour as thyself, and then he does a little turn on it. He kind of turns it on his head. He says, well, if you can't love yourself, oh God, how are you going to love your neighbour? And then he does an even bigger turn on it. And he says, there's a difference between loving yourself, or I actually like the idea of befriending yourself. I like that idea, to be a really good friend to yourself. He says there's a difference between loving yourself or befriending yourself and doing that as a kind of socialized compulsion. It's like that's how you should be. And actually practicing it because it's coming from you. He makes that kind of distinction. So whether it is you want to practice to be a good learner, or whether you want to practice being kind to yourself or friendly to yourself or loving to yourself, whatever works, pace yourself over this day and the next days to come, because we will be continuing with this series about hooking the toe. And for some of you, it's going to stay impossible for a little while, and then it'll shift to something else possible. And for some of you, it'll be easy peasy right from the first get-go, and you'll wonder, so what? Actually, those of you who can do it right from the start, you actually have the harder time. No, believe me, no, it's true. You actually have the harder time. Because what's there to find out? I can do it. So you actually have to pay even carefuler attention to pull out the details that are so obvious that you don't see them. Does that make sense? Yeah, most people with ability have that problem. And when I was doing the cognitive science course, what I discovered with all those individuals wanting to earn mega dollars to develop these computer systems that were able to emulate experts, the last person you want to ask is an expert. Because the expert knows their stuff so well, they can't tell you the details. It's out of their mind. They can't really. It's only the exceptional expert that is able to pull out the details and tell you what it is that they do. And even then, they can't relay it all. So we have another practitioner with us as well, Rebecca? Hi, Rebecca. I've already apologized to Ruth for not saying you were here the other day. Okay. Yeah. So for those of you who can just do this flip, flip, flip with the leg, it becomes more difficult to find out your habits. And little final word, and that is, you know, in that chapter you read the other day, there's that little story about the centipede. I'm not sure. I think that's a Russian fable, because I remember reading it in the Russian neurophysiologist's book, Nikolai Bernstein, and he talks about this toad sitting on top of a mushroom, a crusty little toad, you know, ugly, and walks by this nice little centipede, sort of all swirly and lovely, and the toad says to the centipede, "Oh, centipede, you are such a beautiful creature. You are a wondrous thing to behold to the eyes. Please," you know, that kind of really spiteful kind of question, "please, could you tell me, when you lift the 99th leg, which leg lifts before?" And this poor centipede goes, "Hey, whoa," totally discombobulated. Now, the moral of the story is, when you're out there in the real world doing your jogging or whatever you do, don't ask yourself that question. It can discombobulate you. But in here, ask that question, because this is the environment where you get to actually pay attention. Does it make sense? So when you're in a learning situation, that story does not apply. But when you're out there and you're cooking your dinner and you're wondering, you know, there it is sizzling on the stove with the pan, you don't want to find out what side is your weight on that left foot. You might have an accident. Yeah, but can you imagine right in the middle of a performance asking yourself something like that? No. So when we ask ourselves that question, the tendency to deconstruct the skill is very high. Suddenly you get glitches. Or like I said the other day, yips. You get the yips. All right. Please, come to sitting. And if you're working on a table on Friday, please work on a table, or should I just generally say work in a situation